He was replying to Russian propagandist David Sachs on Twitter, talking about how this war is all NATO's fault. True. I always wondered why NATO continued to exist, even though its nemesis and reason to exist, the Warsaw Pact, had dissolved. Elon's an idiot and he keeps spreading disinformation, and he keeps getting community noted for lying on his own platform. So in this tweet, he states that NATO was created to counter the Warsaw Pact, when in reality, NATO was created 5 years prior to the Warsaw Pact. NATO wasn't created in response. Really, you could argue the Warsaw Pact was created in response to NATO. But this is the president of Latvia responding to Elon Musk. The reason that NATO was founded, exists, and will last is Russia and other enemies of the free world. So here's the truth. I show this map all the time. This is from Time magazine. I know people from Finland get very upset about Finland's being colored red in 1950. Same thing with Albania and Yugoslavia, but there are inaccuracies in this map. But this map showed the size and scale of the Soviet Union and what the Russians wanted. They were driven by communist ideology in 1950. Stalin wanted to conquer the world, and he used communism as an excuse. So in every country in the world in which the Russians could get an audience, they would develop and sponsor a local communist party, and if that communist party ever took control of that country's government, democracy was gone, human rights were gone, all freedoms were annihilated. It was all about Russian and Soviet control through communist policies. And NATO was created to stop this. The Russians were part of the Allies during World War II. Their contribution was, it can't be understated, in helping to defeat the Nazis. But they emerged from World War II not seeking a new world of peace, not seeking a new world of human advancement. They wanted power. And they took over Eastern Europe. They took over the Caucasus. They took over Central Asia. They indirectly sponsored communist movements in North Korea, Vietnam, China, Mongolia. They eventually invaded Afghanistan. NATO was created to stop this. If the NATO alliance never formed, the Soviets never would have stopped. And why did NATO not disband after the Soviet Union collapsed? The easiest answer is bureaucracy is complicated, and to dissolve a military alliance was probably more effort than a lot of people wanted to put in. But the real answer is nuclear weapons. When Russia was reborn in December of 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved. They had a choice to make. They could either embrace democracy and become a peaceful nation and reduce their nuclear stockpile to comparable numbers to other nuclear powers. The UK, France, China, India. If Russia said, we're going to maintain about 300 nuclear weapons as a deterrence, the United States would have joined Russia. The last 30 years of diplomatic relations between the United States and Russia has all been about Russia convincing them to give up their nuclear weapons, to reduce their stockpile to a more reasonable number. And Russia's never been willing to do this. Going back to 1992, you can look at this bar chart. The blue is the US stockpile, the red is the Russians. And they had about 20,000 nuclear weapons. Now, to their credit, between the START 1, START 2, SORT, and New START treaties, we got the Russians down to about 6,000 nuclear warheads. The United States is always willing to go just under that, so the Russians can boast that they have the most, but the United States doesn't need nuclear weapons to win a war. So the United States has always been willing to reduce their stockpile if the Russians will do it as well. The fact that Russia still has 6,000 nuclear warheads and the United States has 5,800. This is because of the Russians. Their unwillingness to reduce their nuclear stockpile. Because they've always had this ambition to get their empire back, to go for it all again. This is why NATO never dissolved. This is what Elon Musk will never acknowledge or talk about.